So welcome to everybody to today's presentation on accounts payable fraud. The fact that you're here indicates that you agree that this is an important area, and you would be right in that assessment. It has become an increasingly risky area for fraud, and the good news is that we do have available some best practices that have been fine-tuned over the last number of years by veteran anti-fraud professionals, and we'll be sharing those with you toward the end of the program. Before that, though, I want to help you get some perspective on the fraud problem in general, not just AP fraud, but fraud in general, and that we'll do through some statistics from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. And then we'll jump into the specific types of most commonly committed accounts payable fraud schemes. From there, once we have a foundation then of how these frauds are committed, we'll turn our attention to how to prevent them, how to detect and prevent them in the minimum amount of time possible. So we'll start by looking at what the red flags of these various AP fraud schemes are, because they are really the essential launching point for effective fraud detection and prevention, and that's where we will conclude the presentation, is with best practices, as I mentioned, on anti-fraud controls and prevention. So without further delay, let me move us into the statistical portion of today's presentation. Some of you might be familiar with some of these statistics. They, for the most part, derive from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, which, for those of you unfamiliar with the organization, is sort of the go-to professional association for folks who are involved in one way or another with fraud detection, fraud prevention, fraud investigation, fraud-related compliance, and ethics-related issues as well. It's a big group. It's almost 100,000 at this point. They do a tremendous amount of very, very detailed and consistent research, and one of the most widely quoted conclusions from the ACFE's research is, to give us some feel for the magnitude of the fraud problem generally speaking, is that $3.5 trillion is lost globally to fraud. That is 5%, translates to 5% of gross domestic product. So we're talking about big numbers, even though we're talking about, an immense, huge global economy. 3.5 trillion nonetheless lost to fraud is rather disturbing. Even more worrisome is that 5% that's lost to fraud globally is also can be extrapolated down to the individual organization, which means that the ACFE further informs us that an average of 5% of any organization's gross revenue is lost to fraud in any given 12-month period. So you can do your own math. Some companies and organizations, fortunately, will be losing less than 5%. They will tend to be organizations with more rigorous internal controls, not just over accounts payable, but also of most other major business functions of the organization. By contrast, organizations with rather weaker controls will be losing presumably more than 5%, but the average at the end of the day is 5%, and the good news is that number has not gone up in about 6 or 7 years. It hasn't gone down either, unfortunately, but it's somewhat encouraging that it has not increased. The average cost for each incident of fraud is $160,000. Now, that needs a little bit of explanation. The association tracks, monitors, and assesses trends in 65 different types of financial crime, of 65 different types of fraud. Accounts payable is one of those types, but it's only one of 65. So when the association issues its biannual report, it attempts to provide us with an average of the per incident cost of fraud for this average out over the 65 organizations in total. That said, billing fraud, which is, as you may or may not know, probably the most common type of accounts payable fraud, costs organizations an average of about $100,000 per incident. So there's a little bit of encouraging information there in that accounts payable fraud, to the extent that your organization conforms with the average of $100,000 per incident of AP fraud, of billing fraud, is substantially lower than the overall fraud loss for the 65 total types of fraud that are followed. Approximately, and this does apply very significantly to AP, approximately 67% of corporate fraud is committed by insiders. This figure comes from Kroll, which is a major international fraud investigation firm. That is a little bit frightening when people see this number first, because that indicates that 2/3 of all the frauds that you experience are committed internally, and that is pertinent to the AP space in that there is a significant component of AP frauds which involve either unilateral, external perpetrators, or more likely externally perpetrated collusive arrangements with internal fraudsters. So that those frauds, which we're going to get into shortly, will represent sort of a gray area in that statistics. Suffice it to say that while it's not accurate to suggest that you should be suspicious of everybody who works in your organization, the fact remains that if you do experience fraud, there's a 2/3 chance that it was committed by somebody working for your organization. There are, to just clarify what I was getting to earlier, there are two primary categories of AP fraud. That's external fraud, which, as I say, can either be committed by solo outsiders, such as vendors and hackers and customers, or through collusive schemes with insiders. The internal fraud, however, is, as we just saw statistically, the more serious threat to AP from a fraud point of view. And there we have to look at, as we will throughout the rest of the presentation, at the difference in fraud costs and fraud types between employees who are at the lower level of the workforce hierarchy, if you will. They are primarily employees below anyone with the title of supervisor, whereas management level fraud, even though they're a smaller percentage of the total, commit substantially more costly AP frauds in general, primarily because they have often the authority to override controls. And I don't want to get too bogged down in that now. We will be talking about that important aspect in a little while. So let us go through first briefly the main types of AP frauds, and we'll start with external fraud because, again, even though it is the minority compared to the 67% of frauds that are committed internally, it is still a huge threat, and some of these external frauds can result in significant losses. So billing schemes, as I mentioned earlier, are at the sort of top of the list. They tend to be the most commonly committed external AP frauds. They're not exclusive to external perpetrators. There are internal perpetrators of billing schemes, as you would expect, since they have a better angle on how they can circumvent controls and so forth. But let's talk about these external folks for a minute. They involve pretty much sort of people who commit crime for a living, if you will. and they will engage in a variety of different types of billing schemes, obviously phony billing schemes. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in particular as we move along and look at some examples. There's also the problem, and this would be oftentimes a unilateral, externally perpetrated scheme, the delivery of substandard goods at full price. This is kind of a sleazy thing to do, ignoring the order from the customer and delivering product that is, below the quality that they have ordered, but nonetheless invoicing them at the full price. That is a common practice, unfortunately, and can result in both financial as well as other serious physical and safety issues. Externally created shell companies and phony vendors, those are...
Thank you so much for taking a few minutes to watch this clip from one of our online meetings. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, stay up to date, and stay compliant. This video is brought to you by GRCTS. We are also known as GRC Training Solutions. And here's a quick information about us and what we do. We conduct many compliance and non-compliance training courses throughout the year, covering some of the most important areas within several industries. Our focus is to provide the best and the most up-to-date classes to our audience. All training modules are designed and facilitated by industry subject matter experts who possess years and years of experience and understand compliance very well. Our customers attend our online classes from all over the world. If you're not available to attend live meeting classes, you can always opt in to get unlimited access to our on-demand or recorded classes. We also provide in-person and face-to-face workshops, on-site workshops where our experts will visit your company at your location and train you and your colleagues, LMS trainings, and finally corporate subscription plans where you pay a little amount to enjoy unlimited access to our courses. We have monthly, quarterly, and annual subscription plans. Here's our contact information for you. If you're interested in learning in any of these topics, or if you know a colleague or a friend who might benefit from our classes, please contact us or visit our website for more information. It's www.grcts.com. You can always send us an email, support@grcts.com, or just give us a call, 248-233-2049.